All right then, so rather than do a sort of formal cheesy introduction that one would normally do, I'll just say that this is Zach, and he is the sole developer of Vertigo 2 and has kindly agreed to come and chat with me. Welcome, it is a pleasure. A question that I want to ask, and I'm sure many of my viewers do, is why did you make Vertigo 2? Or the Vertigo series, rather. What was your motivation?
Well, that's a difficult question. Well, I got into VR game development and, game development in general because I fell in love with VR as a technology, and I really just immediately saw the appeal of being able to enter a virtual world and kind of, become immersed in it and explore and experience a game world in that way that was so different from pancake games. So I think with the Vertigo series, I wanted to just try my hand at creating a world that people could enter in that way and experience. So it was really about creating that sense of I don't know. It feels like I'm just using all the buzzwords, but the immersion in a universe, which is why I opted for a really single player story focused type game rather than something more arcadey, which a lot of other early VR games were doing.
Which is incredibly rare to find in VR software, a more traditional, true single-player, deep experience. Why do you think that is?
I think it's just more of a challenge to develop. There's a lot more labor that goes into making characters, getting all the voice acting, creating cutscenes, that sort of stuff, as well as making big bespoke worlds to explore rather than a multiplayer experience where you can make a couple of maps and have them be reused over and over again for matches, or something like a wave shooter, which was very common in the early days, where you could create one environment and let people play that. And that's not to like diss those kind of games. That's a very economical way of building a game, and that's how people were able to explore really quickly in the early days of VR. And you can see obviously like Vertigo 2 took me like 7 years to make. It's not an easy endeavor to make a game as ambitious as that. It takes a lot of time.
7 years.
Yeah.
My,
I mean,
oh
and it
my.
was on and off. I was working at Valve for part of that. I was at school for part of that. But yeah, 7 years start to finish.
What is it that kept you motivated through all of those years?
Um, my trick to stay motivated is if I find myself getting bored of something, I will try to just work on something else. And I think it helps that I'm so multidisciplinary. If I'm getting bored of coding, I can go and work on the soundtrack for a little bit or work on some art. And that way it kind of keeps the whole project feeling fresh while still making progress on it.
And you are very multidisciplined, which is something I'm not sure how many people actually know, but there are many solo devs in the VR space. But a lot of those solo devs will often outsource or bring in other forms of their game, which they didn't produce themselves. However, you are not only the programmer. How much did you actually do in terms of your roles with Vertigo?
I really did like almost everything. I did most of the 3D art. I use a few asset store assets like
Hmm.
the AK-47, for instance. I didn't model that myself.
I noticed.
Um,
I said that on stream. As soon
yeah,
as I got it, I immediately knew. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and I think that was kind of an okay thing to do because it's
Yes.
supposed to be like it's supposed to stand out as a very realistic gun in a world of much more silly, fantastical sci-fi guns. So all the rest of the weapons I made myself from scratch, but I did the whole soundtrack. Let's see, I did some animations, but I also, like, a bunch of them are just stock animations because I'm not very good at animating. Obviously, I didn't do all the voice acting. I hired a cast of voice actors to do that. But I did write the whole script myself.
So you programmed the entire game.
Hmm.
You made all the music. You did basic animating. Well, not all the music, because I know that there was a lady who sung a theme or soundtrack.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Sorry, what was it? You did the animation, you did the programming, and you made all of the models.
Most, yeah.
Most. That's pretty damn talented.
Thank you.
Very, very, very impressive. Did you not feel any temptation or desire to get outside help?
Um, I did, but I don't know. I have such a like well-established creative process by myself. I don't really know how to work effectively with a team, and that's
Hmm.
something I want to do more in the future because I haven't really had many chances to do it. I did it a little bit while I was at Valve. I worked with another contractor named Keith on Moondust and the lab, and that was a really good experience.
Hmm.
But even there, I was pretty like self-directed.
There are a couple of things I wanted to mention in regards to Valve, but before I go there, I want to take a step back to what you said about virtual reality itself and how it really compelled you. What exactly is it about VR, bar the obvious actually being in the world itself and perceiving things in 3D? What is it that really draws you over Pancake, that it inspired you to spend 7 years of your life making this game or the series?
Well, I think the obvious part of being in the world and seeing in 3D is a big part of it. Like the novelty wears off a little bit over time, but it's
Mm,
still a very cool way to play a game. The other side of things that really intrigues me is motion control input
mhm.
and just all of the incredible things you can do with that, all of the really interesting gameplay opportunities there are with that, which I feel have still barely been explored. I think a huge ways to go when it comes to cool VR gameplay.
Yeah, yeah, I completely agree with you. Why do you think that so many games or so much software has rarely tried to explore the motion control aspect of VR?
I think it's simply just because it's so new and there aren't established norms for how to build game mechanics for VR and motion controls. Well, I guess they're starting to be now, but there haven't been for a while. And it's also just so different from mouse and keyboard or gamepad controls. You have, many more degrees of freedom to deal with, and it's just a step away from, the abstraction of buttons towards like a person just being there in your game and being able to do what they want with their hands. So it takes a very different way of thinking about input.
As someone who's a non-programmer and is not skilled in any of those things whatsoever, I would make the assumption, maybe it's a fanciful one, that to a programmer, someone who's in the industry, like yourself, someone who actually knows how to do this stuff, that they would look at the Wild West that is VR and think that that's an exciting thing, that there's no kind of standardization, and would want to explore the numerous input possibilities, particularly with the motion. Do you think I'm being overly fanciful with that?
No, I don't think so. I think a lot of people in VR want to explore the possibilities. The reality is that it's pretty hard. We're all kind of stumbling around and looking for things that work, and often that takes a lot of time and a lot of experimentation. And that's something that, not all game studios have if they're, looking to make money and stay afloat. So that's probably the biggest barrier to interesting VR game mechanics, and possibly why a lot of VR games are falling a little bit short, is that there's just not enough time to really try interesting things.
What do you think the prognosis is for the future to come?
Um, I don't know. I'm optimistic that things will, VR will get better. I don't think it's gonna, have a huge explosion, or I don't think there's a huge explosion imminent anyway, but I don't think it's gonna like die and disappear by any
Hmm.
means.
Hmm. The barrier for entry can be quite high, especially for PC VR and having to get everything set up. I think that once that can be simplified and, as you say, more standards are set, then perhaps
Mhm.
we'll start to see an emergence of much more interesting stuff.
Yeah, I think so.
I hope so. I hope so. When I first played VR years ago, it's similar to how you said immediately. It's like all of the possibilities flashed in front of me at once,
Yeah.
particularly with the use of motion. Not only that I could perceive everything with real depth and was actually in the world, but when considering the motion itself, it's just, yeah, I just had an explosion of possibilities come over me, and I was incredibly excited. And over the years, I have to say, I've been quite despondent or let down by the lack of software that seems to share in that excitement, which is why I'm curious to speak to those in the industry to try and understand why that is the case.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I don't think anybody's really fulfilling the potential that VR has. Even looking at my own work at Vertigo 2, I feel like I've fallen a little bit short in some ways and fallen back on pancake game design principles, just like so many other VR developers do. When it comes to joystick locomotion and some of the ways that you explore the world. Like Vertigo 2 has a lot of interaction with your guns,
Hmm.
but I feel like I wish I could have had more interactions with like props in the world, like something like Half-Life Alyx, where there's just a lot of interactable objects around. But that's just something that, takes a lot of time to design all those interactions and model all those little props. It's just like I was saying earlier, it takes time and resources to explore the possibilities of VR
Of course.
mechanics.
Of course. Especially if one is a solo dev too, it doesn't become as feasible to do the things that we are used to, which is, again, another very common thing with VR software. A lot of solo devs, and it can be a blessing or a curse. It depends very much on the dev in question, I think. I tend to espouse or push the idea that we should be going more towards being in teams again, especially in today's age where communication and collaboration is easier than it ever has been. And I do wonder why there are so many solo devs in the VR space, especially, but that's another conversation. However, without meaning to pander, you are the exception because you are a solo dev that has taken care of a lot of the critical details which I think are often omitted in a lot of other games, which I will touch on later. So you are the exception to the rule.
I would not recommend the solo dev experience to anyone, especially anyone starting out. I've had a very unusual life and upbringing, and it's let me dedicate a lot more time and energy to VR than most people might be able to.
Sounds fascinating. Interesting. Well, I won't pry on your unusual
Oh,
life.
no, I'm happy to talk about my background if you want to hear about it.
Sure, please.
Yeah, I've talked about it before, but so my dad is a computer programmer as well. He worked for Microsoft back in the day on the original Xbox, and so he's always, helped me out with my interests and hobbies. And in 2013, he got like original Rift DK1 dev kit at home, and he let me try it, and then eventually have it to start learning Unity and to start making my first awful little VR games on it.
And how long did that take you when you first started to get a awful game up and running?
Oh, I don't remember. Probably a couple months. It was just your average like first Unity project ever. But that was back in 2013, so I've had a full decade to learn, and I spent a very large amount of that decade making VR games.
And you have a parent who can support and guide you along the way. Did you refer to your father much during the process?
Yeah, so I did. He's not a game developer. He's just a software developer. So I ended up finding that he couldn't help me with a lot of aspects of game development and VR development, just because it's too specialized. So a lot of that was self-taught from YouTube tutorials and such. But he was still a great resource when I had questions about, more general programming topics. And then he ended up getting a job at Valve. I don't remember when, like 2016, 2017. And I just followed him to work one day. And I don't even remember how I ended up becoming a contractor there. It was that like they needed help with something, and I offered to help with something because I was, a VR developer in Unity at that point, and they needed a VR developer in Unity, so I started contracting at Valve through the connection I had with my dad. So very, very lucky situation.
Indeed. So, what did you learn at Valve?
That's a good question. I don't know if I learned any like, specific valuable chunks of knowledge. It was more the general experience of being there that has stuck with me, and all the, the interesting people I got to meet, and all the cool projects I got to, look over the shoulder of people working on. I mean, everybody knows they have a very unique company structure, and that was interesting to see up close.
Could you elaborate a touch more? I'm actually unfamiliar with the company structure.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
So Valve has a quote unquote flat structure. So they don't have managers. There's not really a hierarchy.
Oh,
There's not a rigid hierarchy. So if you're a Valve employee, you're just an employee. You're supposed to be on a an even playing field with everyone else. And then like salaries and bonuses and stuff are kind of decided democratically by your peers through this weird consensus process that happens once a year. And it's a very, like, they have very strong ideals about it, but it ends up having some kind of social consequences. And there's a lot of social stratification that happens in place of the normal managers and underlings stratification that usually happens at companies. So like people that have been at Valve for a very long time are considered more senior and end up having more authority when they say something, even if they aren't officially supposed to have more authority.
yeah.
More people listen to them and that sort of thing. It also results in people can get fired from Valve, and it happens again sort of democratically when your peers just review your work and say you're not doing enough for the company, so you get fired.
Wow, yeah, I had no idea that Valve had such a structure. I've never bothered to research. Huh, interesting. Pros and cons to
Yeah.
every system, I suppose.
Yeah, but it was like I said, it was really interesting to work there. And I was also I was a contractor, so I wasn't a full employee, so I wasn't quite part of the structure. In theory, I got told what to do, although like I said, I was pretty self-directed while I was there. They just told me, we need a we need a tech demo for the Valve Index, and I made Moondust out of that.
What is Moondust?
Oh, Moondust is this, I mean, it's a tech demo I made for the Valve Index controllers. It was mostly an internal thing, and for developers, it explored like finger tracking, and it helped solidify how we were going to build the Unity plugin to let other developers use finger tracking and, pressure sensing and all of that.
I see. So, no philosophies or guiding methods that you took from your experience at all, which come to mind?
Um, yeah, not really. I mean, Valve has a good philosophy when it comes to playtesting, which is just playtest a lot. I guess I took that lesson, but I don't know, that's a pretty well-known one.
What's your favorite VR game?
Hmm. I think recently I've been getting back into hot dogs, horseshoes, and hand grenades, playing Anton's new Take and Hold, like little roguelike mode.
On the new map he's making?
Yeah, the new map
Yeah.
making. It's quite fun.
And why have you got back into that? What does that offer you that has brought you back?
I don't know. I just like the guns in that game. I like the huge variety of guns. It always keeps it novel.
And the way that you interact with them, perhaps? The physicality and
Yeah,
detail
the
of them?
quality is good. Yeah.
Is always good indeed. Something which is similar in Vertigo, actually. One thing I praised during my playthrough is that you have a very physical design, lacking the precise term, in that there is a sense of weight, but also there are a lot of details and nuance in how you interact, or how the weapons behave when you interact with them, which goes back to Vertigo 1, actually, I noticed, with the SMG sniper hybrid gun that has the handle that you pull and push on the side of it. I noticed that when you do that, there is a little animation, I think is the word, to indicate that there is a physical force moving the gun a little bit, which you also
right.
carried forward into Vertigo 2 with a lot of the weapons too. It's a really, really, really wonderful, lovely touch that almost no other VR game does.
Yeah.
And I'm curious, why did you add that? Why was that important to you, and so on?
Yeah, I'd love to talk about that. So those kind of physical touches, I think, are really important because our brains are so good at like recognizing the details of fine interactions our hands are doing, because that's, important to surviving and like being a living creature. So we're very finely attuned to the details of the forces we're applying on physical objects. So whenever I'm designing an interaction like that, when you're sliding a piece of a gun or I don't know, shoving a magazine in or anything that you're doing with your hands, I always try to think through the actions and reactions that are happening the way you're pushing on an object. For the slider is a great example. Naively, you might think, oh, you pull on the slider and you're just pulling the slider. You just have to move the slider and that's all you need. But actually, the slider is, it's touching the gun. And when it hits the end of its little sliding track, the gun has to stop it, and that's an action. And the reaction is that the gun gets pushed forward a little bit. So you have to take that into account. And the math is not difficult. You just apply the opposite force, equal and opposite force to the gun. Basically, for free, these very nuanced and satisfying interactions.
Nuanced is the right word, and it. I rant about this really often, especially in shooters. The lack of nuance in a lot of VR software, which is why I'm so ready to praise it and highlight it in games like yourself, because just as you say, there is a lot more going on with these actions, and we notice. Yet so many other pieces of software, I won't name specific ones, seem to omit those, in my opinion, vital details and nuances which really help to sell the illusion of what you're doing in a very tangible and physical way.
Mm-hmm.
So when I encountered that in Vertigo, I was delighted. It really makes a huge difference, and I wish so much that other devs would understand the difference that it makes. I think it's also an issue because it's somewhat of a subliminal, a subconscious thing that's not so obvious on the surface, and maybe players aren't consciously aware of what's going on there, but so when you ask them, they wouldn't be able to say, but it is so important, and I appreciate it very much. And I'm very happy to hear that you notice that.
Yeah, it's definitely something most people won't notice consciously. And it's also something as a developer you might just not even think of if you're not familiar with the nuances of how motion works and how physics work.
Yeah.
If you're just a programmer, say, and if you consider it just a game mechanic and you think, oh, the slider on this gun needs to move so that the player can change weapon modes and it has to be functional and that's it. You're gonna do the naive thing and just have it move in a simple motion.
Really?
I think the reason VR games in particular often lack the nuances here is that for normal games you have a very specialized role, which is an animator. You have an animator that's designing all the weapon animations and reloading animations. And animators, their whole job is knowing the nuances of how people move and how interactions work. So they're really good at making those look right. But in VR, you can't just animate that. Instead, the gameplay programmer has to design that. And gameplay programmers are not specialized often in the nuances of how people move and how interactions work.
But surely they're aware of the necessity of those things. This is where my lack of understanding of what goes on behind the scenes, or not knowing too many people in the industry, probably bites me in the bum. Because, say, I'm a solo dev, but I've played a lot of games. I'm well versed in flat screen and in VR games. If I were venturing out to make a game and knew that my skill lay only in a specific area, I would be hyper aware of what I would be lacking as a solo dev with only a specialized skill, and would make sure, or try to make sure, that the other elements that are crucial, the nuances, the detail, get in the game one way or another, be it through hiring outside help. So yeah, I guess what I'm trying to say is that for me it feels like if you're a developer making a game, then you should, I say with air quotes, inherently understand the elements that make a game and take care of those details one way or another. So it's surprising to hear that they don't, or that they're unaware of those details.
I don't know. It's not terribly surprising to me. It's hard to know what you don't know.
True.
And again, because VR is so new, there's not years and years of really phenomenal VR games to look at and study and see what they did right. You sort of have to, just imagine these gameplay mechanics in your head or experiment with them and do a ton of trial and error to figure out what feels good. So it's difficult and it's time consuming and it's sort of if you like look back to the early days of video games in general or like really early PC games, there's a lot of jank. There's a lot of game mechanics that could have been vastly improved if they, did one thing a little bit differently or, used some of the modern techniques we use to make things feel good. But they didn't because it was just not really understood back then that certain things were more conducive to smooth gameplay.
In the world of dev, there seems to be a lot of impetus of time and getting stuff done, which of course makes sense from a business perspective. But also, is it not part of the process that you just explore and be very experimental and not worry so much about getting things done as an engineer would, just sort of tinker around and mess around for a while?
I very much think so, and that's why I take so long to finish my games. Because I do a lot of tinkering and I do a lot of adding new gameplay mechanics on the fly. I do a lot of like rewriting entire systems. I like change the entire interaction system, I think, multiple times throughout Vertigo 2's development. Yeah, I mean, that's just expensive to do if you're a normal small studio. So I'm sympathetic to people who don't have the time to experiment. But it does result in worse games, so it's a shame.
Do you enjoy the process of experimenting?
Oh yeah, very, very much. I think everybody enjoys experimenting. I think it's more a factor of time and money, like I said. I would guess that most VR developers, if they could, would be happy to spend forever experimenting and refining
Yeah.
their games.
Well, thank you for that insight. You can probably tell that I'm very much a layman, very much an outsider. So most of my perspectives on the development and the psychology, it's all very much speculation from me. So any insight that I get, I deeply appreciate. I'm always curious as to, or I'm always concerned as to whether I'm being unfair in my critiques of software and what they may lack and the jank and so on, because I don't know what goes on behind the scenes.
No, I think critiques are always valid.
Really?
Um,
The internet doesn't like critiques
well,
these days.
yeah, I mean, you can be an asshole about it, but I think it's always valid to point out where a piece of work falls short. There should never be a situation where you have to like lie and say something is good when it's not good. I'm very open about critiquing games that I think are not good. And yeah, the only nuance there is that like you have to not be an asshole. You have to, understand why or try to understand at least why the developers did what they did. That maybe it's not their fault that something is falling short, or maybe it's a lack of knowledge, a lack of experience. Nobody wants to make a bad game.
Or a lack of standards.
Yeah, possibly a lack of standards, but that's just a lack of experience by another name, I would say.
Yeah, I suppose.
You
I
know,
suppose.
thinking that a standard is not necessary is like ignorance.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know. It's because my channel has more of a reputation for being quite critical and direct and honest with those things. I do get a lot of flack for that, and I do get the overarching impression with a lot of software, though, or particularly with fans, users of different games and series and software, that the idea of standards is very much in flux at the moment, particularly with VR software, and that if you deign to critique anything, then as a critic, you are demanded by the fans that you consider the life circumstances of the devs who
Oh,
made the game. And it seems to be more and more common these days as well, as they will have constant rebukes of it's very hard to do this, or it's only this amount of devs, or this reason or that reason or that reason, and that's why it's so bad. And I feel like it's being used to excuse
yeah.
a potential lack of standards.
Yeah, I hear that. I think that's yeah, I don't think it's good to defend like something that is lacking in quality just because lack of resources behind it or whatever. Like I said, I think critiquing games is good. I don't think there's any value in like
It's simping.
yeah, pretending something is better than it is
Yeah.
because of circumstances. I think it's absolutely valid to consider the circumstances and say like, this thing may fall short in certain ways, but it's understandable that it does because of the circumstances. But yeah, I don't know. There's definitely people who just will defend something by any means.
Speaking of critique, what's your feelings about the overall reception to your game series?
Well, I think I've been lucky to have a very positive reception overall. And I think that is mostly the case because I'm providing something that is pretty rare in VR, which is a really focused single player adventure. And people are hungry for that. And even with Vertigo 1, Vertigo 1, the original, was like super buggy and janky and broken. And it was also 2016, so that was all, a little bit more par for the course. But even then, people were like, this game is janky and buggy and broken, but it's like a cool single player VR adventure, so I love it. And with Vertigo 2, I was able to make it less janky and less buggy and broken, but still a cool single player adventure, so people liked it even more.
The step up from Vertigo 1 to Vertigo 2 is quite enormous. I went back and played the first one after finishing 2, and yes, it's huger in every way. How long did it take you to make Vertigo 1?
Vertigo 1, I made in about a year, a much shorter development cycle.
That's not bad for a year, though.
Yeah, I mean, it was a little thrown together, but yeah, I really kind of popped it out quick.
Yeah, that's very impressive. I would never have guessed that was put together in a year. Great job. I really mean that too. Genuinely, wow. Speaking of Vertigo itself, I'm a little bit familiar where the ideas for the series came from. I know that you and, was it a brother or a friend, came up with a lot of the concepts and characters and ideas when you were kids, correct?
Yeah, it was me and a high school friend of mine, plus an online friend of ours from the UK. And yeah, we kind of devised the whole universe and a bunch of the story beats of Vertigo and Vertigo 2, which were originally supposed to be a single game, but then we split it up into two because it was too long.
And did you devise all of this with the intent of it being a game, or just to have fun as friends and make up your own world and be silly and stuff, and then it eventually escalated into becoming a game?
Yeah, it was always supposed to be a game. In fact, before we had the story at all, I made a game prototype that I also called Vertigo. It was originally there's actually an Easter egg of it still in Vertigo 2. I don't know if you ever found the nostalgic pistol secret weapon, but you find it in this room with like a bridge and a bottomless pit. You have to shoot a bunch of drones.
I
Did
don't
you
think
play
I
that?
did, no, no.
All right, yeah, it's very like hidden out of the way. But anyway, the original game named Vertigo was just this bridge over a bottomless pit where you had a gun and you were shooting these spherical drones, which are the same drones that are still in the game, little round guys. And then based on that, I thought I want to expand this into, a few more rooms. And I really like these like, really big drops and really big spaces in VR. So that's why that is kind of the main theme of Vertigo is these really big, breathtakingly large spaces because that's one of my favorite things in VR. It always feels cool.
Is that why
Um,
it's called Vertigo?
that is, in fact, why it's called Vertigo. Well, I guess the bottomless pit is why it's called Vertigo, but that is in the same energy. So anyway, this early prototype just expanded more and more. I made an original demo that was a few hallways, and then I eventually decided I wanted to build a story around this because the gameplay was fun. And yeah, it just expanded more and more from there.
Why is it important for you that there was a story?
I like games with stories. I like being able to connect with the world a little bit more, and I like stories in general. I mean, who doesn't like stories?
Right, yeah. The reason I ask you that question is because, again, it's alluding to what we've already mentioned, but there is a lack of. It's not even just for VR. I think in Western culture in general, there's a bit of a lack of new original things. We are rehashing a lot of things. One of the great joys of Vertigo 2, probably the most important thing actually, was that I didn't know where the hell it was going to go next. I am old enough and experienced enough now that I can clock what a game is going to be and how it's going to play just by a trailer or two or by the first few minutes, which has its consequences. I know what to expect for pretty much most things I play. But for Vertigo 2, not only did I have no idea where it was going to go, but everything was original. The worlds were original. The characters were original. Everything was new and fresh and creative and silly, and I felt like a kid again when I was playing it, rediscovering a new world and being led through this new world and environments and characters who clearly have their own history. And it was such a refreshing experience for me, not only in VR, but in gaming. So I really appreciated that. It is rare to find something original these days.
Well, I'm really glad to hear that because that was absolutely the goal of Vertigo 2. For a long game like that, it's really important that you keep things interesting and don't let the gameplay stagnate. So the way I did that was constantly introducing new enemies, constantly introducing new environments, and keeping them very, very different from one another so that the game doesn't stop feeling fresh the entire way through.
So then, Zach, why doesn't every other dev realize these things and think like you? Why?
Because it's hard, because it takes time and money to build a bunch of unique environments and unique enemies.
And yet you did it all by yourself.
Yeah, well, I have a lot of free time. I don't know. I have a lot less restrictions than most developers. I think that's the easy answer.
Were there any special guiding philosophies that you had? I know it's touching a bit on what we've said, but when you were developing Vertigo 2 in particular, were there several key things that you remained locked on for the duration that had to be done? Philosophies in design, I suppose.
Yeah, yeah. Well, one of them is the one I mentioned before, the consistent theme of large spaces, large environments. Just because experiencing those is so striking in VR, I thought that was a good consistent beat to hit over and over again.
I think you've really succeeded there. I'm sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to add. I don't know the name of the world, but it is when you get teleported and you are in that really open grey world with the spheres surrounding you and the statue in the middle. That was so striking to me, and striking is the perfect word for it. When I first got there, I was looking around, the sense of scale and the alienness of it, but what I'm trying to say is it was very striking, very successful there. Good job.
Yeah, that's one of my favorite environments.
Yeah.
That one I had planned for a very long time, and I was very happy with it because I built it in only a couple of days, but when I looked around it in VR, I was like, this is exactly how I was imagining it in my head. Cool feeling.
Must have been very satisfying.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. You built it in just a couple of days.
Yeah, I mean, it's a simple environment if you think about it. It's just a plane for the ground with a sand texture on it. There's some mountains off in the distance, and there's a dome of clouds, and then some spheres, which are also very simple, composed in that way, and with the striking color scheme of completely gray.
Why did you choose the completely grey color? I'm sorry to sabotage what you were saying before.
Oh, no, I love the questions. I chose that because the rest of the game is so colorful, so I wanted it to contrast really heavily.
So keeping with the theme of contrast and variation, keeping things fresh.
Totally.
Anyway, back to what you were saying, the philosophy, so wide open spaces, were there anything else?
Let me think. I mean, I feel like I'm just repeating myself, but the variety is also another design philosophy I have. Having a lot of variety to make it interesting. I don't know. I don't really have like a hard and fast set of design principles. It's my process is very improvisational. I often add new areas to levels in the middle of developing them. Sometimes I add new areas to levels after I finish developing them. If you remember the crocodile enemies that appear occasionally, I added those to the game, I think less than 2 weeks away from its release. I just had the idea. I feel like there should be another water enemy because that one fish with the 3 eyes isn't a very interesting enemy. I want another water enemy, so I added the crocodile creatures.
And when that happens, when you make that choice, is that exciting for you, or does it not fatigue you at the idea of having to conceive, or, excuse me, not to conceive, to conceptualize another entity that you have to design and make and put in the game?
Yeah, I think if it fatigued me, if the idea fatigued me, then I wouldn't do it. I find the creative process very enjoyable and rewarding, and that's kind of why I do what I do. And I love being able to sit down and sketch out a creature and then sculpt it in 3D and texture it, and within a couple of days have it in VR in front of me, and then programming its behavior, creating sound effects, and then just boom, a new enemy in the game.
Very gratifying for you?
Yeah, very, very gratifying.
Speaking of sound, have you always been one to dabble in making your own music, or did you only do it for Vertigo?
Yeah, I've been dabbling in it for a long time. I would consider myself kind of amateur still because I don't really do it as my main profession at all. It's more of a hobby for me, but yeah, I've been doing it for a long time.
How important are the sound details for you in a game?
They are quite important. I actually consider sound design in particular not one of my strengths. It doesn't come super naturally to me. Yeah, I don't know how to describe it. I feel like that's something that I would hire somebody else to help with if I could.
I just realized that my question was a bit stupid, actually, asking you how important is sound. Of course it's important. What a
No,
stupid
yeah.
question. When you were answering me, then I was just thinking, hold on. Like,
I mean,
yeah,
yeah, it's
yeah,
no, I think it's an quick question. I mean, I know it's something that's very important to the player experience, but it's something that is like that I am not incredibly passionate about. Like,
yeah.
it doesn't give me the same kind of creative gratification that creating like a 3D model does. It feels more like work to me, even if the end result is, great and important.
And of course, this is where having a team coming together
Yeah,
with their own strengths would help.
indeed.
What are your likes and dislikes of the game development process?
I dislike marketing. I think marketing is miserable.
Why?
It's I don't know, it's just so difficult. I don't like selling stuff. I feel like I'm trying to like I don't know, it just feels so like fake and weird.
I agree with you so
It's
much.
just like a personal thing. I mean, obviously like people that aren't like in marketing are not going to be good at marketing.
Yeah.
And that's another, struggle of solo development. And that's why I almost entirely rely on like word of mouth and kind of just posting YouTube videos and posting screenshots on Twitter to get knowledge about my game out there because I don't think I could do much in the way of marketing or effective marketing.
When you say that you feel a lot of marketing is fake, could you elaborate? What would be your idea of sort of fake or phony marketing or
I
cheesy
mean,
or
I don't even know if I would call it fake necessarily. I think that's not the right word. It's just like synthetic. It's like, you're creating marketing to be marketing. It's just like the current state of the advertising industry is so huge and well established and like refined. It feels icky to participate in.
I feel the same way about a lot of how we demonstrate our products to each other, particularly in gaming,
Hmm.
where I'll go onto a store page and they'll write a news piece about something that's happening with the game. And the way that they word it is that we should be incredibly excited. And it just makes me cringe every time, rather than just say, hey, we've done this thing. It will be available at this and this time. It's like, oh, hey, guys, we've done this great thing. Get ready. Be excited. Blah, 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 blah. Ugh.
Yeah, I find myself writing that way for trailers or for blog posts sometimes, and I always feel like, who is this? Who's talking here? Like, this isn't how I talk.
Exactly. It's the social programming that's getting to
Yeah,
you.
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah, I completely understand. Marketing is something that you dislike. Anything
Yeah.
else?
I mean, there's certain things like animation and sound design I've mentioned I don't think I'm very good at. They usually feel like a slog to do. But I wouldn't say I like really strongly dislike them. It's just more of a chore than most work. And I think that it's only in contrast that I dislike them because I do love so much of the process so much. Like 3D modeling, writing code is incredibly satisfying for me. Thinking of a new game mechanic and then creating it and getting to play with it,
Yeah.
especially in VR where you're literally like playing with it with your hands. It feels like playing to me.
So it seems that the physicality of VR, the motion controls, is quite important to you.
Hmm.
How would you like to see that evolve for future software?
It's a good question. I'm not really sure. I feel like the current standard of a VR controller with, a few face buttons on it is actually pretty solid because it both gives you, the really accurate hand tracking and potentially finger tracking too, if you have that on your controller. It balances that with, having the button inputs that are necessary for some kinds of gameplay. Whereas something like hand tracking without a controller, I feel like really limits what you can do just because of the lack of precision and the lack of touching something physical. You know what I'm talking about?
I do, I do. I've never personally tried hand tracking, but I can understand.
Yeah, it's I mean it's something that people seem to be pushing for, and I don't know if it's like a cost thing, like people don't want to build controllers anymore, or if it's like a really like visionary thing, like the future of VR is going to be all, waving your hands around in the air.
Hmm.
But I don't know if that's the way forward, because it's always going to feel weird to be touching stuff in VR without touching stuff in real life. At least with the controllers, you have something in your hand.
What's your feeling on things like movement by using motion such as arm swinger or variations of it?
Yeah, motion is hard in VR. I don't think joystick locomotion is perfect. I think it often leaves you feeling a little disconnected from the virtual world just because you're sliding around it and it starts feeling like you're playing a regular video game again instead of, standing there in VR. But I also don't love arm swinger just because it's a little bit like inconvenient to have to wave your arms every time you want to move. And then like teleporting is teleporting. I don't really like teleporting either. It definitely feels like it's a ongoing challenge.
I've been pushing for an idea now, and because I've roped you into an interview, I'm going to tell you the idea very quickly and force you to listen. And you can tell me from a development side if you think it's something that is actually good or if it's complete rubbish. I feel that, much like a lot of things with VR, a lot of the complaints that we have from players, such as they don't want to crouch down as much, so they would prefer to have teleport grab. It's tedious to have to bend down and pick up things often, yada, yada, yada. So then we design all of these extra assists into our games. I contest that the reason a lot of players will complain about that is because VR games are designed to be played standing or sitting stone still. Whereas if there were a little bit of light movement involved regularly in the process, then the body is already warmed up and limber and ready to take more extreme actions, such as suddenly bending down to pick up things. I think that the current implementation of arm swinger, like it is in H3 VR, is it can be fun, but it has its downsides. My idea was that we use the joystick to move forward initially, and then if we very lightly swing our arms or sway our arms to the side to emulate the way that we would move our arms roughly to match the speed that our avatar is moving. And then if we let go of the joystick, so long as our arms are in motion, we continue that movement so that we've freed up the thumb. And then if we say we're swaying our arms to the side lightly, then we would be moving at a walking speed. But if we wanted to burst into a sprint, then we would start moving our arms in real life to match that particular speed and how we would move them. But if we're playing a shooter and we wanted to utilize moving and aiming or strafing without waving our arms to get in the way of it, then we can put the thumb back onto the stick so that we can move whilst holding up a weapon and aiming and whatnot. I feel that on paper, players would hate this, but if they were to do it, if it were implemented in an intuitive way, that it would really help to connect them with the avatar and the world itself.
I think that's an interesting idea.
Thank you. Thank you. That's all I wanted to hear.
Yeah, I can't think of anything off the top of my head that would not work about that.
That's really good to hear, because as someone who's a non-programmer and has no idea how to do any of that stuff, I've no clue how feasible it would be in a mathematical or programming sense in order to implement such a system, or at least to trial it. So it is good to hear that it is something that could be at least tried without issue.
Yeah, there would definitely be ambiguities because, it's not as simple as like if a button's being held down, then you check for arm swinging. There would have to be some like analysis of whether the player is trying to do arm swing locomotion or whether they're just, moving their hands accidentally.
Mm. Mm.
So you definitely have to, play around with how you detect that. But, you have to do that for all sorts of game mechanics.
Of
It's not
course.
a huge deal.
So going back to Vertigo, did you conceive the story with your friends too? So it wasn't just the world, it was the entirety of the story. And have you completely told?
Well,
Oh, sorry, go on.
let's see. It wasn't quite the entirety, actually. We had the vague outline of the story established from very early on, but there were some elements that didn't get added until after Vertigo 1 was done. And that was mainly the Void delegation and Enrique and Cowboy. So their whole story arc did not get added until later. Originally, the story was just that you were trapped in an alternate universe and you were trying to get home through the reactor core.
And have you successfully told the entirety of the story, or is there untold parts?
I leave the ending pretty open-ended. I don't have any plans to do a Vertigo 3 though. I've said as much before. I mean, obviously the main character Sonia's story is done because spoilers, she either dies or or goes home at the end of the game.
I
I feel
chose
like
the go home ending.
nice.
Actually, I did that by accident because my controller died when the time came
No.
to. Great
So
timing.
did you want to
It's
want to do the other ending?
yeah, I did. So I
Oh,
accidentally got that one. But that's because, again, to praise yourself, I had been live streaming it for about 10 hours. I was so enthralled. I was playing for so long that my controller died. It's the only time it's ever died on stream. It's the longest I've ever played any VR game in one sitting. That's how enthralled I was to keep going. But yeah.
an honor then.
Genuinely, you did a fantastic job, and I assure you, I do not pander, I do not kiss ass. So when I say those things, I genuinely mean it. Really, really fantastic work, especially considering that you basically did it all yourself. Fantastic. The two factions in Vertigo 2, what inspired them, aside from the obvious?
They're just inspired by the Russian Revolution and the church before the Soviet Union came into being. I mean, very vaguely, obviously. A cartoon version of both sides there.
Why did you decide to put that into the game?
Because I think it's a fun dynamic. I mean, it's just a silly idea, this city of robots having a civil war, and the fact that one of the sides is pretending to be the Soviet Union, and the other side is like a cult that has an actual like interdimensional god that they're worshipping. It's just keeping with the very ridiculous style of Vertigo's story.
And again, very unexpected.
Yes.
The part which follows after that, going to the sea.
Mhm.
I can imagine you got a few complaints from players about that because of how intense it is. Would I be correct?
I don't think I've actually gotten that many complaints about motion sickness.
Oh,
What people
good.
complain about is that that level's just too hard. And I think that probably comes from the fact that the boat is tilting around, making it harder to aim. But I was definitely surprised. I thought more people would be like, this is making me throw up. But I guess that if you've played the game all the way to that point, then you're probably pretty steady on your feet. There is also an option in the comfort settings to make the boat not tilt at all. So
Oh,
maybe,
really?
yeah.
Oh, that's so nice of you. If I were you, I wouldn't do that.
Really?
No, definitely not. No. I think I don't want to make this too much about my own opinions, but complaints about motion sickness and things, I think that a lot of the issue with that shouldn't be on the developer's shoulders. I think it's a similar thing to when we first brought cars into society, in that we were
Yeah.
moving at speeds faster than we ever had before, and motion sickness was definitely a thing, or car sickness, as we call it. But as animals do, we adapted. I do feel that a lot of devs or software, they pander, understandably, but also kind of, I feel like they should think of the big picture. I feel that they pander to those complaints a bit too much, and that we're only going to get over motion sickness with a good attitude and just by facing it. So yes, if I were in your shoes, I would not have added that, and I would have given positive encouragement and reinforcement to have them face it and realize that it's not real, it's not happening, and that you're not under complete control of your audiovisual process, and so that they can face it and get better and never suffer it again.
I mean, I somewhat agree with you. I mean, you can tell from the gameplay of Vertigo 2 that I don't really hold back when it comes to motion. You know, with all the jump pads
Yeah.
and locomotion and vehicles and whatnot. But I mean, there's definitely a small number of people who just physically can't get over motion sickness. My mom, for instance, gets car sick if she's not the one driving. If she's in a car, she can't not look out the window, even though, she drives all the time. And that's, not something she can just power through. It's just been that way her entire life. Some people playing VR just will get motion sick, and I don't know if they can power through. I don't know if there's some like, yeah, I don't even know if it's possible for them to get over it. So I try to be accommodating when I can without sacrificing the experience for people that do want more of an extreme experience.
So you're a nicer guy than me. Yeah,
Yes,
yeah.
I
I've got
think
a
it's okay to to feel annoyed that people are paring back experiences. I certainly felt that with like Half-Life Alyx with their
Mm,
fast smooth locomotion.
yeah. I really do feel that too. I feel, whilst making things accessible is important, I do feel that for VR, because VR is still in its infant stage where it kind of needs that creativity, just try anything in order to allow for innovation to happen. I feel that VR is still at the stage where we need that lack of caution and lack of care about the accessibility in order to keep on pushing boundaries, and that if we focus on neutering it too much, then it's never going to be where we hope and know it can be.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I definitely partially agree, and
Mm.
I think my work speaks for itself. That yeah, I'm all for pushing the boundaries of weird VR gameplay, but I think it's okay to spare a thought for accessibility. I think it's more than okay, actually. I think it's very good
Mm.
to spare a consideration for that, because you know there's a portion of your player base that otherwise won't get to enjoy what you've made.
Mm. Question from one of my viewers. It's a multi-stage question, so if you need me to
All right.
repeat any part, just ask. He says to Zach, do you struggle with your own standards when developing? For example, when creating a feature, material, model, etc. Do you struggle with it not turning out like you envisioned? If so, how do you deal with it when it's constantly happening during development? Thank you for inspiring me to explore game dev.
Very nice. That's a good question. I think a lot of the time my work does meet my expectations. And that's probably just because I'm pretty experienced at this point. I've been doing it a long time, so I know my workflow really well and I know what results I can get. So I know what to expect out of it. But definitely when I was beginning, it would of course not meet my expectations and it would not turn out exactly how I was picturing it in my head. And that's just something you have to deal with, unfortunately. Your skills aren't going to be incredible when you're starting out, and the only way to get better is to keep working. I mean, I don't think it's a good idea to just, keep hammering away on the same asset over and over again until it looks how you want. You probably won't learn that much doing that. I would say just keep doing new things. Just accept that the things you create aren't going to be perfect, and yeah, just get stuff done.
So would you say that you're not particularly strict on yourself in that way?
Yes. I am not. Yeah, and I didn't used to be when I was starting out. I was very accepting of the fact that my work was not great.
Hmm. Would you say that you're a disciplined person?
In some ways, yes, but also I think I've just been able to find a workflow that doesn't require a ton of discipline because it doesn't feel like I have to push myself to stay disciplined. It feels more like I've just found a way to enjoy what I do all the time.
It's wonderful.
Yeah. Hopefully I won't like burn out in a year and never be able to get work done again.
Well, you're taking a break presently, correct?
Yes, yes, I am.
Hmm.
I'm doing my best to take care of myself and my brain.
Have things been not going so well with your brain?
No, no, they're going great. I just yeah, trying to avoid burnout in advance.
Yeah.
It's definitely something that a lot of game developers deal with.
Hmm. Especially in the internet age where you're online
Yeah.
and yeah, very easy to happen.
Hmm.
For the VR industry, what are you hoping to see next, or where are you hoping for it to go? And if this is too broad a question, just say.
Yeah, no, that's okay. I'm feeling a little bit disillusioned with the VR industry as a whole right now. I feel like the result of the Quest has been, a lot of money coming into the VR industry and a lot of success as, more people are having VR, but also a shift away from actual interesting exploration of VR as a medium and towards monetization and
Hmm.
kind of just turning it into the rest of the game industry. And that feels like a disappointment because it felt like in the early days of VR, it could be so much more than just another medium for money to be made and you know repetitive intellectual property spin-offs.
So Facebook came along with the allure of the money.
Hmm.
But was it just that which put out the fire or the spark of the potential for interesting
I don't,
VR
I
stuff,
don't,
or were there other? Go
I
on.
don't think it. I mean, I guess it did put it out. I see it more as like overshadowing it
Okay.
with this, massive behemoth of a company, pushing the metaverse entirely, making VR synonymous with the metaverse. it just really felt like it overshadowed the more interesting bits of VR.
I don't like the name Meta. I think it's so narcissistic, like to stand up and claim, to
Yeah.
understand the word, the meaning of the word meta in today's culture, and then exclaim yourself to
Yeah.
be the meta. It's so, I want to say arrogant, but I don't, but it's not strong enough. It's,
No, it is arrogant, and it's also embarrassing because they immediately fumbled the metaverse, and
yeah.
now they're called Meta, but they like have stopped even trying to be the metaverse. They're like they realized it sucked. I don't even know what Facebook is doing now. I know they like aren't trying to be the metaverse anymore. They rename again, I guess, into like something related to AI. Who knows?
Do you think that the friction of PCVR was also a big issue in it taking off, in needing a powerful PC, having to set up the tracking, in that it was reserved for those who were more wealthy?
Yeah, I think so. I think it was probably the main reason. Because like everybody who tries PC VR loves it, you know? Like I'm sure you've had friends and family over and let them try VR and had a great time. And the only thing stopping more people from getting to enjoy that is the friction and the accessibility of it.
So, what do you think that VR itself, the industry, in terms of PC VR especially, what do you think is a needed next step in order to revitalize the more interesting side of VR and take it away from the meta money mindset, so to speak?
Um, well, I don't know if there's like a magic bullet that'll revitalize it. And I'm really hoping Valve has something up their sleeves. It seems like something's coming. And disclaimer, I'm not in touch with Valve at all. I have no idea what they're working on these days. So I have no more insight than anyone else on it. But I'm hoping they're going to release a new headset or something soon.
I think I think that if we can find a way to make the devices self-tracking and wireless as more of a standard, that will be a huge roadblock out of the way for higher fidelity VR. It's wishful thinking, I know, but I think if we could find a way to remove having to set up external stations and also remove the tether, that we are more naturally inclined to move around more. And
I mean, I agree. Yeah, and I mean, we're getting there. Like camera tracking is becoming more and more common. Like I guess all the new headsets are using it these days. Yeah, it seems like it's definitely the future. I don't know if I have mixed feelings about it. I feel like it's such a messy like tracking method. Like having cameras all over everything seems like so much extraneous data processing that needs to happen. But I guess if it's the best solution, it's the best solution.
when you say extraneous data processing, you mean that it's more complex or that there are more
Yeah, just
risks?
like there's just quite a bit of computing power that has to be dedicated to processing the feeds from the cameras that are doing the tracking. Whereas something like Lighthouse, there's no cameras involved. You just have a couple of very compact feeds of data that you have to process and basically just do a little bit of math on, and it tells you where the headset is. But, with cameras that are just looking at a room, you have to do computer vision, you have to, yeah, it just takes more work for the computer.
Yeah, yeah, I know absolutely nothing about that stuff. I'm just a layman, just a consumer.
As a consumer, it definitely seems like inside out tracking is the best option.
And wireless too. I can't wait to
Mhm.
have high fidelity wireless. I despise the tether so much.
Yeah.
All right then, Zach. Well, that's pretty much all that comes to mind thus far. Was there anything that you wanted to talk about in terms of Vertigo or?
Yeah, I do have one thing
Hmm,
actually. I'm working on an update for Vertigo. I don't know if you've heard about it,
I
but
do. I've been following it, of course.
yeah, I'm working on a level editor, which is almost done. It should be releasing pretty soon. I don't have a solid date in mind, but definitely within the next couple months. Yeah, that'll be a full NVR level editor, and you can share levels with people online. And there's also a bunch of other bonus content in there, like more playable characters. So yeah, that should be a lot of fun once it comes out and provide a bunch of longevity to Vertigo 2.
May I ask, why are you making this? What's the motivation?
I think it's people really like making levels and sharing them with each other. It lets people enjoy the game more and kind of explore areas that I wasn't able to explore in the campaign. So yeah, just it feels like a fun feature, and I always like when a game has a level editor.
In terms of scale, could we make similarly huge or vast levels that are featured in the campaign or beyond that?
Yeah, actually, a bunch of the environments from the campaign are included in the level editor as baseline environments that you can build off of. So you can build a level like inside the city of Autonica or inside the Heart Tree Cave, even inside the reactor core chamber, and just fill that entire space up with whatever you like.
Would it be possible to alter the geometry?
No, you can't alter the existing environments, unfortunately. I provide like stripped down versions without any props though, so you can fill them up how you like. And there is importing custom meshes as well. So if you want to create something from scratch, that is possible.
Has it been challenging to design a UI or input process that you can edit an entire level in VR? Because I imagine that you're doing this from scratch. You're conceiving everything yourself, right?
Yeah, so I actually have this or a similar level editor for Vertigo Remastered as well. So I've been able to carry over a lot of the code and the interface from that. But yeah, I've been mostly just building it to be more flexible and have a lot more props because Vertigo 2 has like hundreds of models that you can add as opposed to Vertigo Remastered, which only had a few dozen, I think.
Zach, you put many other studios to shame with your efforts. You really do.
Well, I'm not trying to put anyone to shame. I'm just
I
trying to
know.
do the best.
I know. But the amount that you have gotten done and the quality of it, considering the circumstances, it really is quite the accomplishment. And I can only wish that there were more Zachs in the industry. Again, I know I sound pandering and cheesy, but I do mean it genuinely. The quality of your work is excellent.
I appreciate it.
And I appreciate what you've done too. All right then, enough pandering and cheesy stuff said.
Yeah, it's been really fun to talk to you. Like I said, I haven't done an interview with the community in a long time.
Thank you very much for agreeing. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, it's my pleasure.